today's special session about conversations that matter. We have two of our dear special guests that I would like to introduce to you. It was really kind of them to, they're very busy individuals for them to join. And it's our honor actually to have them with us. Our two guest speakers today are Imam Abdul Ishaq Abdul Hafiz and Safiya Abdul Hafiz. Imam Abdul Hafiz, a little bit about him. He is with the Shura Council of Southern California. He works especially with the Prison Outreach Program, or as they call it, POCS. And Abu Ishaq Abdul Hafiz was born and raised in Gary, Indiana, and is a graduate of the historical Black college Tuskegee University in Alabama. He also completed religious studies in Mecca and in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He will be sharing stories that will really be, heartwarming, and also his experiences. Additionally, he might include that his journey to Islam was when he was only 20 years old. On the other hand, his better half, sitting next to him, is Safiya Abdul Hafiz. She was born in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Her family moved to Gary, Indiana. I wonder where they met. In 1950s. Safiya attended Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Dominguez Hills, where she finished with an MS in early childhood special education. She was employed as an early childhood educator with Los Angeles County Office of Education until 2015 when she retired. Safiya has been married to Imam Abdul Hafiz for, mashallah, 45 years. They have two daughters that live in Baltimore. What state is that? Maryland?
Maryland, yeah.
Okay. Yay. Okay, great. Well, both of you, welcome. I must warn you, these two are super, super sweet and always matching, dressed to impress. Right there. Look at them. That's great. So thank you so much for joining Olive for this very important session. We love honoring our different heritages and backgrounds. So thank you for being here today. To get us started with some conversation, what would you like our Olivers or our listeners to learn about today?
Well, assalamu alaikum, everybody. We just want to talk about the history of being African American, and we are African American. Sometimes people ask us, like, where are you from? Meaning, I guess they think, or they don't know what country we're from, probably because we're Muslims, and maybe we like to wear African clothes just because we like the colors and all that. But we just wanted to talk about the history, our history here as African Americans, and see if anybody had any questions that they wanted to ask us. We were going to start off by playing the national anthem for just a second so everybody could hear it. Should I play it, or do you? Should I play it, Saida?
Yeah. Yes, sure. Is it a video or is it just an audio?
Till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the room sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope the present has brought us, facing the rising march on, till victory is won.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to us being able to have this conversation, as we are descendants, of the slaves who were brought to this country over 400 years ago, kidnapped and taken and stripped of our names and stripped of our religion and stripped of everything. And it is important that we have this conversation with those who have migrated here, or those who were born here and who don't know the history of the descendants who came here to build America. I mean, this is a great country and a powerful country and a wealthy country, but it came at the expense of 300-400 years of free labor. And that must be understood, because in the educational system in this society, that conversation is not often there, and especially from our narrative and our perspective. And as Safiya so well articulated, we were a part of, we grew up in the civil rights era, which, kind of really always there have been those who have been enslaved who have been asking for freedom. We know that in the preamble of the Constitution, it says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among them is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that all men are created equal. These were words, but legislatively, we were not included as being human. Our ancestors were property, and so the children born of slaves were born into slavery. And even if the owner had raped the women and had children, those children were slaves. And so this is the story that must be told. And it began by Carter G. Woodson in the 1920s, started off with Black History Week. That song that you heard Safiya start off with is the Black National Anthem, that whenever there's a Black History program anywhere throughout this country, it begins with this anthem that had been written and is our way, our message to each other and to the world of our plight and our striving. And there's been so many accomplishments that have been made in spite of being looked upon as non-human or being not protected by the law. And this is what the civil rights movement was about the African-American people and people of color being treated according to the Constitution to have legislative protections under the law. And beginning in 1952, when there was a case, Oliver Brown versus the Board of Education, that it became famous in 1954 when the Supreme Court ruled that there was no, it was unconstitutional, separate but equal education. And this was the first time that African-American children were being allowed to have the same educational equipment that was being used for the white students across this country. And this argument continues to this day about the diversity programs in education and opportunities. I mean, so there still is this continued struggle to get equal opportunities, in this society. And so this is why, again, it is so significant and so important that you know our story, that you know our struggle, that you know the benefit that not just African Americans have, but that all people have been benefited because of the civil rights movement that began to change the laws where people could be able to buy homes, to live in different communities. When we were children in Gary, the Black people lived in the central part of town. And although I don't remember specifically being told where not to go, but I knew that there were certain areas you could not be caught in. You stayed within the realms of the central part of town. You did not ride your bike. You did not find any way to cross these lines because of the prejudiceness that was in Indiana, and that continues. Laws can be written, but people don't have to change their attitudes, and we, continually are dealing with this. Why the movement of Black Lives Matter is so significant, because it's all tied into the real difficulty for people to change from their racial attitudes and things. So again, I just wanted to share a little of that part of why it's important that you know the story of Black persons here in America from our perspective and reality. I'll let Safiya say something, and then I'll add what it felt like for me as a teenager and as a child during the Civil Rights Movement.
Can we share the photos?
Yes, of course.
The first one.
Okay.
Um,
I'm gonna go start the little.
Okay.
1 second. I love this picture of you too.
Thank you.
Is this the one you wanted to show first?
Can we go back to the house? The house. Back and more back. The old house.
This was all the pictures I have. Let's see.
I think you have.
Okay. So we're missing a picture?
Might be.
Okay. While I pull it out, go ahead and start the story and I'll go back and maybe I missed something.
I was going to start by saying that my history is well documented by my mother, who was a teacher, a historian, a poet, and an actress. And so she wrote down everything about when we were growing up. And so we have a little book that she had written many years ago, and we compiled it. The picture that I was trying to show, which is in the slides, is this picture. And actually, that is a picture in Goldsboro, North Carolina, where I was born. I was born in my grandfather's. That's the house. My grandfather was a doctor there in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and I was born in that house. So I grew up in that house, not really, pretty much when we were in Goldsboro until we got to Indiana. Very protected and not knowing anything at all about racism. Personally, I didn't know anything about it. There's my mother and myself, and she had myself and my sister, and she protected us against everything. So we really didn't know anything about racism, although she did. We didn't until we were little girls. So we moved from Goldsboro when she married my father. After she married my father, we moved to Gary, Indiana, because there were more jobs there for African-American men, or at least they were supposed to be in the steel mills. So that's where we moved to Gary in the 50s.
Mm.
So
how old are you in this picture, Sister Safiya?
I might just be like 1 year old. This is like in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in 1948.
How many siblings did you have, you said?
Just have one. I have one sister, one older.
Sister.
And so when my sister was born, my mother had her in the hospital, but the conditions were terrible there for African-American people. So when my mother had me, she had me in that house because she didn't want me to be born under those conditions. So that's where my life started out. And then, as I said, we moved to Gary, Indiana, so that my father could have more employment. I actually didn't know that much about racism until I went to camp as a little girl, and I had my first experience with the camp counselors, who were all white people. And I got ill in the middle of the night, and they took me to the doctor. And when they were bringing me back, I heard them say, "Well, who is this little pickaninny?" And really, I didn't even know that word. I didn't know what that meant. But I just felt like it was something really bad. So when I got back home, I asked my mom, and she told me, that's what they call little Black kids. They call them little pickaninnies. So that was my first experience with racism as a little child. But you can go to maybe the neighborhood. Okay, that's my sister and I. So we just grew up just like any other kids with children on our block. And as my husband said, we didn't really go too far out of our neighborhoods. We stayed pretty much in our neighborhoods. So we didn't experience anything, too much racism outside of our neighborhoods, other than if we wanted to go to certain restaurants, or we wanted to go to the restroom or something outside of our neighborhood, then we would run into problems. So basically, we just grew up normal there as the African Americans in our own sequestered neighborhoods, I guess you would say. So can you show the neighborhood picture? Okay, this picture is basically one of the African American neighborhoods in Gary, Indiana. My husband grew up not far away from our house. Our houses were just about the same, not far from Michael Jackson, as everybody always mentions. But we just had just normal little homes there. And we grew up there with our family. That's in Gary, probably in the 1960s. So we did, until we were teenagers, like I said, we didn't have a lot of experience with racism, but the media and all the marches in the South were happening, and my sister and I were looking at that every day. So we decided that we wanted to go on the Selma to Montgomery march. So my mother wrote a whole story about how we went on the march to from Selma to Montgomery, but she tied it into when she left the South. She left the South with a cross burning in her front yard because her father was a doctor there. He was treating the animals. He was treating the people as well. They were out in the county, and they didn't want my grandfather to leave out in the county and go to Goldsboro. So her remembrance of her final remembrance that she says of the South was the cross of the Ku Klux Klan burning in their front yard. And she wrote a story about a time to remember. But she said in her story, let's see. She talked about how she came home from school, and we were preparing to go. We're preparing to go to the march, and we hadn't even asked her, but we cleared it with my mother, and we went with a group of people from a church. They were going in church buses, and we went to Selma. We didn't go on the whole march. I think we ended up going just on basically a few of the miles into Montgomery. But what I really remember about that was I had never seen the faces of people being so cruel and so mean. And even the National Guard, we couldn't ask them a question because they were so rude to us and mean to us. And we had not been exposed to to that kind of action before we left our home. But I do remember the march vaguely in the back of my memory. And my mother wrote that in her book, she wrote, when the freedom marchers returned home, meaning my sister and myself, they were footsore, they were weary, unkempt, sunburned, and relieved and glad to be home. I had gotten permission to pick them up because she had to pick us up from the church. And I wanted to see them. She wanted to hold her big girls in her arms and see to it that they were fed and had a good bath and into bed. But they had changed. The look in their eyes was different. And as we sat and talked, the tears fell silently. Seems sort of ironic, this kind of introduction to the South for them and the kind of things they caused me to remember. So that's just an excerpt from a story that's a couple of pages long in her book. This is her book. And so the other screens were pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King's marches. No. Yeah, that is the march from Selma to Montgomery. And that's the National Guard, how they stood there ready to, I think they were prevented at that time from actually harming us, because before that they had stopped the marches on the bridge. There had been some other attempts at the march, but this was the third attempt. And so the president had stated that people had a right to protest, so we were able to go. They want to say something?
I just want to just share that, you know, in 1956, when Emmett Till, and, you know, the movie came out called Till, which is something that, again, if you haven't seen, you should, you know, have an opportunity to look at this film of this young African-American. In fact, just on the news just a couple of days ago, they're still talking about possibly charging the woman who said he whistled at her, and he was horrifically murdered and tortured. And I was 6 years old at the time, and his mother had the casket to be open so that the whole community could see how her son had been horrifically, you know, killed. And this really had a lot to do with the impetus of kicking off the civil rights movement to another level, because following that was the bus boycott, you know, in Montgomery, that led to the laws being changed, that Black people didn't have to ride in the back of the buses or the back of the trains, you know, on their way back and forth to work. And again, as a young person living in the North, in Gary, Indiana, we would see a lot of this on television. And we were wondering, you know, what kind of people were down South, because most of the things that we were seeing on television was in the South, even though these same rules were applying, you know, in Indiana. Even if we went to a restaurant downtown, you couldn't sit at the counter. You had to take your food and go outside, all just because we were Black. I mean, and so this double standard was the reality in which, you know, we were raised. And I don't want to, you know, leave the impression that Black people were not living full lives. As Safiya said, her grandfather was a doctor. Her great-grandfathers were ministers and educators. And there were many African Americans who had lives that were professional, and they had businesses. So these things occurred in spite of, you know, racism and the system itself not, you know, giving us the protection. That was, I think, the biggest issue, where we weren't protected if we were violated in any way by a white person. We couldn't go to the courts or go to the law enforcement for those protections. But there were African Americans that was in the military. People need to know that the first person killed in the war with George Washington against the British was a Black person, Crispus Attucks. You know, and Black people have fought in every war. I mean, in spite of being slaves and all of that, have always been loyal to this country, and we've always done, you know, our part. And so the civil rights movement was pushing the government to give us, you know, full citizenship. And in that, pursuit. It wasn't something that the government readily, because the government is made up of people. And so most of the people in Congress, in the House and the Senate were white. And so they didn't have an interest to change many of the laws. Black people were being lynched. And even to this day, they didn't never stop the lynching laws. I'm talking about in the thousands, they were lynched and burned alive. And yet, there was no protection to catch the culprits who had done those things. So these were, the issues going on. But as a teenager myself, and I understood Dr. King had studied Mahatma Gandhi and this whole nonviolent approach. But as a young person myself, I was like, I was not going to let nobody spit on me, and nobody going to hit me in the head with no rock, and I wasn't going to do anything. So I wasn't, and many young people were not a part of that, going and marching and being a part of that. And so that was an issue, being a young person, being raised and saying, I'm not going to be abused like that, because you get hit in the head and you may not recover, was my attitude. What changed was when I went to college and I went to the South, and I, got a new experience of witnessing firsthand what it was like to be, in the South. And that did open up for me the chance of seeing something else. I wanted to study, Africa, and the different parts of West Africa that I learned, had been Muslim, and so this introduction to African studies and what was the religion of those in Africa. And then when I discovered it was Islam and what Islam is, then I said, wow, this is something that was totally kept away from us, and I saw that this whole narrative that the slaves were savages and were ignorant and didn't know anything about God, didn't know anything about Jesus. And this was why, the whites felt that they could abuse them, or they could capture them, and they could try to civilize them. When you find out the history of Islam, in West Africa and the universities in Timbuktu, and again, what Muslims believe, about Prophet Jesus, Islam, and Prophet Muhammad, Islam, and all of the companions that were with Prophet Muhammad, Islam, it was another truth that I was able to learn more about and accept. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's blessed my life in ways unimaginable as a child, because I didn't go to college looking to change religions or looking, I wasn't, I didn't become a Muslim because I was challenging Christianity. I became a Muslim because of the knowledge, the truth of what the Quran spoke and what the life of Prophet Muhammad Islam exemplified. And that in and of itself provoked in me to say, this is what I feel is the truth. And I had prayed, because I believed that there was God, but I could not believe that what was being taught, by the Christians, from this white perspective, had anything to do with right, with good, because of the abuses that occurred, even when the people had changed and followed them in their religion, they still treated us like we weren't human. So I was saying something's not right with that. And in fact, leading up until I was exposed to Islam, my real attitude was, I was going to follow the way of Moses. I said, because to me, there was no ambiguity in the Jewish teachings as there was with the so-called, New Testament and the narrative in the New Testament and everything. And at that point, when in my heart, nobody knew this but me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed me to Islam. And I saw a picture. And to me, that picture was the oneness, not only of us as humans, being the children of Adam, but the oneness of the prophets, the oneness of the messages that each of them had brought, and the clarity of that truth. And so I'm forever grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, guiding me, to this. And again, the significance of our people's story is so important, because sometimes if people have migrated here or immigrated here and they've become citizens here, they've only learned from what the European books talk about America, and so much is left out. And again, to truly see what you see on the streets, when you see Black people and it looks like they're unemployed, and you buy into the narrative that they're lazy and they don't want this or they don't want that, or they seem that you don't see this generational money like you do with other groups that come. And then you find out, because of all of the redlining, where they didn't allow us, to get loans from the banks, or opportunities to open up businesses, or to expand our businesses, or to be able to send our children to school and education, ways, in a general sense. Then there's some background to why you see what you see, and untruth of the laziness. And one thing I love about Safiya and her family, because they have captured their history, and again, now alhamdulillah, I've been able to, through genealogy and new history ways to trace my family's background. I can go back to 1670s of great grandparents that I've been able to track. But with Safiya, her great grandparents, again, they were educators, which is special, because ministers, they were Baptist ministers and reverends, which meant they were educated. They meant that they were leaders, that they were able to be representative of the people in North Carolina. Being her grandfather being a doctor, his brothers were all educated. Her mother went to college, and her father, she was driving cars in the 1920s. Her mother, and then graduated from college in 1930. Her sister went to college. Her brothers, were in the military, and then Safiya, her sister, both have master's degrees. Her sister's an attorney. So their family, going back from 2 centuries ago, have been among those educated all the way to now. Whereas there are many, African-American families where they having the first person to just graduate from high school, just here of late. But, the story is very diverse and very wide, in our experiences, as a people. But, our story is not just a sad story, but it's one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us as a people to overcome all of the horrific horrors of the journey of what slavery was and the abuses being a second-class citizen. And yet we still, as the proverbial word, rise, by the grace of Allah. We still rise, and by the grace of Allah, we did not become zombies of these people who had captured us and who tried to limit, our ability to be all that we could be as human beings.
Mm. Thank you both for sharing those beautiful insights. And Sister Safiya, I do love that your stories are so documented. That's so important that your mom jotted down her thoughts after she attended those events. That's beautiful.
We're really thankful that we have so much information on our families. My uncles were photographers, and so they took photographs of everything in the United States back many years. So we have a lot of documentation. My husband's family, they don't have so much documentation, and I only have that one picture that I showed you that maybe I didn't show on screen when he was a little boy.
Oh, but, yeah.
Yeah, we did. Our families did know each other when we were children. Our families knew each other. It's not an arranged marriage.
I figured with the same city, Gary, Indiana seems special. Yeah, I'll pull that picture up. But it looks like there's a question for you guys. Sister Hakika, would you go ahead and like to ask it yourself?
Sure. I was wondering, how do you feel that the young people, are they realizing what struggles were gone through, and how now we don't have white water faucets or white people using certain bathrooms, and how we're able to go to any hotel we want to go to? Do they realize the struggle from before that got us to where we are now?
You know, in my opinion, Hakika, some of them do recognize it because they've joined groups like Black Lives Matter, and they want to be sure that all African American people and all people have the right to do everything. But a lot of them, I feel like they do not. You know, they're just caught up in their world of Rihanna and whatever, you know. And I don't think that they realize the struggle that their parents and their grandparents went through in this country so that they can have the right to go and do whatever they want to do. Even though they really don't, because, you know, as you see right now, we're worried when our sons and our husbands go out on the street. We're worried that the police will attack our family. You know, innocent people that are just out there doing the normal things that everybody else is doing. And I don't think that a lot of the people really do recognize the struggle that we all went through. But, you know, inshallah, we're just praying for them and that they will at some point recognize.
And to add on to that, you know, that's why it is so important and significant that Black History Month is talked about, and that, you know, and that they are taught, because, you know, it's unimaginable sometimes to see the language of young people using the N word because they have no clue. When we were coming up, you know, to call somebody Black was the worst thing on earth you could be called. You know, and for them to trivialize those realities shows, you know, their lack of learning, you know, the struggle that took place for us to be where we are, where we now, you know, can have jobs and can really be, you know, in a larger sense, all that we want to be and to travel around the world. But they have lost, you know, a lot. I never imagined, because when I was a kid, you know, coming through school, a lot of the kids that was coming to Gary were from the South. And I couldn't imagine that a time would come where young Blacks wouldn't want to finish school, because we were like the first, you know, generation in mass numbers that could go to high school, and college was opportunities for us. And what has happened from, you know, our generation's grandkids and great grandkids is unimaginable when you see the high school dropout rates. When you see them, you know, not pursuing the opportunities that are there. This is why this is so significant that we, as we get older, you know, share with them what has been accomplished and what they can't take for granted, because they can lose it. You know, this way, the voting rights is an act. It's not even law. That can be taken away. And then, you know, I mean, so it's so many things that we have to keep pushing forward to, you know, to make the society better. But it's not through just wishing. It's through us talking about what we've overcome, what we've been able to accomplish, and definitely sharing with our grandkids and nieces and nephews, you know, the story in a way that they see the significance, you know, of this.
I recently visited St. Louis and shared a picture with Zainab. They have these pillars in different parts of town. So this goes with what you were saying about how you knew you couldn't go to certain areas. So you see this pillar standing, and I was like, I didn't even ask the sister initially about the pillar because I didn't think anything about it. But then when I saw 2 or 3 or 4 of them throughout, I said, you know, what is that? And she said, oh, well, back in the day, we knew we couldn't go on the other side of town where these pillars were. Subhanallah. And we also visited the Arch of St. Louis, and it's actually on the bank of the Mississippi, and the rings on the ground where they used to chain the slaves, when they came up the Mississippi, are still there.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
SubhanAllah, as as a reminder of what went before. It's just astounding that I didn't even realize, that slaves came up the Mississippi to St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear her talk about this history, I was just like, you could almost see in your mind's eye the slaves chained and, scantily clad, barely had any clothes on, and were being sold, families sold to different plantation owners and so on and so forth. It's just so unimaginable. And to mention something else that you all said about not knowing our history, I went to the movies with 3 girlfriends to see Hidden Figures. And I sat there and tears just came down because I never knew anything about that history for us. To me, history, or not history, but knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
And you can go really far knowing that somebody that looked like you went that far before, so that you could go even further than them.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So true. So true.
We were in a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and went to the African American Museum.
You got to go there.
If you ever are in Washington, or even if you're in Birmingham or Montgomery, you have to go to those museums to see, they even have the chains that they put on babies. I mean, it just, it breaks your heart. But at the museum, you get a chance to see how always the slaves were petitioning to be free and to be treated. This is not something that just started in the 1950s or 60s.
Right.
All of the time. It's so wonderful just seeing that story, seeing how they were constantly trying to show and prove that we were worthy. Because we built, Washington, D.C. was built by blacks, the White House, and the congressional, buildings and structures, and so many cities. You go to Savannah, and you still see the concrete streets that the slaves had put down. To this day, are still in buildings, still to this day, still in place, that were built by the hands of the slaves. To see the work, the artistry that's there, and so it's so significant that we, remind ourselves of these stories, of these truths, and again, being so thankful that we have survived, because so many, didn't survive. It was horrific, but mercy protected us, and we are still here. The descendants still speaking, telling the story, telling the truth. This is why, again, it is so important that this story is not lost, and that it is articulated by us, rather than someone else telling our story. Because again, people, they get this romanticized look at Dr. King. They don't know he was hated by the government. They weren't welcoming those marches to shut down those shops and those stores where we weren't being treated right. When he left this life, the last thing in the world you would have thought that these people would have honored him. But it is only through time that they now look and see the benefit of what he was doing and what he led. I mean, because he wasn't just him by himself. It was thousands of men and women and children, because the children in Birmingham that left the schools, and I'm talking about elementary school kids that started marching in the street because their parents was afraid, and the college kids that were sitting down in the restaurants and things, against even what Dr. King and those went, because they wasn't pushing for that. But, people began to take charge and say, we're gonna do this, we're gonna make this happen, and the government had to come in and do what was right, but by giving us the opportunity to vote, so that we could be able to make a difference. And then, of course, good-minded people of all colors, joined in. But for many of them that began to come to this country in the 60s, to get a chance to go to the universities and to get these opportunities, was on the back of the civil rights movement, because it wasn't about, again, making these laws just for Black people. It was for all people of all colors, of all religions, of all races, of all genders, because women weren't treated right either until the civil rights movement opened up for women to be treated as human, because they too didn't have the same rights. You know, and to this day, we're still, you know, fighting for women to get paid equal for the same work that a man does. You know, I mean, so that's still a current, as it is even with African Americans. You could be on the same job doing the same thing, but a person who is white will get 3 times your salary, and you're doing the exact same work. So these the truths of how some people were, you know, did hard work and did the labor, but were not able to be compensated. You know, and this is why the thing about reparations is still being talked about. And other people who were done wrong, reparations were paid to the Japanese. Reparations have been paid to the Jewish people from Europe that were, you know, devastated by the Germans. Many of these nations pay reparations, but they are balking at giving reparations to the former slaves, knowing that we worked all of these, you know, years at free labor, and this country, you know, sold cotton and all the other products that they sold to make it this mighty, powerful, wealthy nation. And it's facing even to some banks and insurance companies that are still present now that benefited in ways that they still, you know, are being asked to just be fair.
These are such powerful words from both of you. I know there's 2 people who would like to ask questions. Sister Zakiya, would you like to unmute yourself first? I see your hand raised. And then go ahead and ask your question. I'm assuming it's a question. And while she's doing that, let's have Raza, go ahead. You want to ask yours?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your personal stories and your amazing experiences, you know, about growing up in the South and in Indiana. Very powerful. Thank you so, so much. In light of the Black History Month, and I don't mean to bring politics into it, but it's we just talked about the significance of educating especially our children about the history. I'm just trying to, you know, get a better picture of, I've been thinking about it lately a lot. As we move forward, you know, I almost feel as if there's a movement going on, especially in the South. Florida is a perfect example of taking books being taken away, educational material being taken away, you know, to almost suppress, you know, the information. So is there something being done in a bigger scheme of things? And I mean, what is being, I mean, organizations, individually, and because as much as history is important, in order to share history, looking forward, what do we do now to protect that, to make sure that this is, you know, the books, the educational material stays in its place, in fact, to promote it even more. So I just wanted to get some feedback from you as to what you know, if there's anything being really done on a bigger level.
You know, things are being done. I mean, there are people advocating to make sure that their voices, you know, are being heard. This is continuing even with Muslim schools, you know, that the books and material that are in the books that the kids are being able to receive, that we are part of these, you know, bodies that assess and look at materials as being included or excluded. So parents being engaged and involved is very important, as well as there are, you know, advocates representing different groups that are making sure that this fight continues. We definitely can't sit back and rest because it will be taken away.
Thank you for sharing. Is there something you wanted to share, Sister Safiya?
Yes, actually a question, because I was kind of concerned if there was any movement or anything going on, so that going forward, you know, like the brother was just saying, that, you know, even like on a grassroots house to house level, you know, where, you know, we're more aware, we learn about our history, and, you know, that it becomes something, a part of our households, you know, so that our children, you know, even from younger ages, or when they're able to understand, can begin to understand our history. I would be, like, I would be concerned, to where I could get this information, where I could go, you know, whether it's a website or, you know, some local place. So that was my question. Is there any, you know, are there any movements going on to make regular people, you know, everyday people aware?
Yes, there are definitely movements, and there are websites, you know, available, as well as, you know, going to like the African American Museum in Los Angeles, taking your kids there
Right here.
to places. That's what I'm saying. In LA.
Which museum is that? I'm so sorry. Can you say that again? A little bit louder.
It's the African American Museum. It's at Exposition Park.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it's a fabulous beginning
And right
to
now, the
take.
African American thing in the mall.
Right, yeah, at Crenshaw Mall right now, there's African American Film Festival. That's, you know,
Wow.
the works and the arts of African American, Caribbean, and African peoples, you know, works that they're doing to continue these stories. And young people, in fact, they had a thing this past weekend for the children to come learn their history, to learn about, you know, what they've been able to accomplish and who they're, you know, connected with, so they can know that we've always been people that have made a contribution to the human journey and the human story. So we, you know, those are some of the places that are beginning or that starts, and you know, to share with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was going to also mention that, you know, I think education in regards to this and conversations is for all ages. I mean, that's why we're here today, to, you know, educating our Olivers and Olive community as well, because I think many times, you know, giving this little platform can go such a long way. You know, so we are recording the session and we'll upload it on our YouTube page as well. So please do go ahead and share and do your part and share these stories. And you know, these are treasures for us. And this is just like how Sister Safiya's mom documented their history. This is a form of saving that. Recently in LA, since most of us are in Los Angeles or Orange County area, LA Opera had a whole program called Omar Ibn Said's story about a 37-year-old scholar who came, and it was a different kind of art form to see that on stage, but it was a great way to, you know, share a very powerful story in a different format. So I hope more things like that come out so that the masses can, you know, some like movies, some like conversations, some like music, you know, or spoken word. That's powerful, right? So a little bit of everything. Now, as we conclude the session, any last minute thoughts, any advice for our Olivers? What can we do differently? What can we change in how we act and react and whatnot? So anything that you would like to enlighten us with? You've shared so many beautiful messages already, but
you know what, Saida, we're just so thankful to be a part of Olive. You all do so much for the community. You've done so much for our masjid. We're so thankful. And then if you, just like you said, you all share these videos on YouTube, and I think you're just doing a beautiful job. We want to ask everybody to pray for us as we go to make Umrah on Thursday.
Oh.
We are so blessed to be going with that Olive group, and I don't know if anybody here also.
Oh, you are going with that little group. Okay, I'm so happy to hear that. Okay, well, wish you a very blessed journey and pray for all of us.
And we definitely will pray for you, and I hope you can pray for us.
And thank you. We appreciate it. We really do.
Yes.
All right.
Allah keep you safe and good.
Yes.
And
come back safe and sound.
And just one thing I would like to, you know, say is just going on what Safiya said. You know, Olive has done a great job in helping us continue to keep our stories, you know, out there for each other. And this is what's important, is that, you know, we get a chance to articulate and to share, you know, our journey with each other, all of us. You know, as we get older, we realize that, you know, we've lived through history. You know, we witnessed it at the time. We didn't know that's what it was, but you know, now as I reflect back on my childhood and what it was like coming up and where we are as a nation, we see that we've been a part of this, and all of our stories are important. And thank you for giving us this forum.
Thank you so much.
To share
Appreciate it.
our story.
Oh, of course, of course. Thank you everyone who joined in. I also want to give a special shout out to Dr. O from the OC Healthcare Agency. He joined us, so we have some special guests in the room. Thank you for being here, Dr. O.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? And or we'll it's 12 o'clock. Oh, reminders for our Wednesday session. Let me put the camera back on me. But thank you both of you for your time. I really, really, really appreciate it. Dr. O, I see your camera is on.
So since you mentioned my name, I just want to say good afternoon, everybody. Interesting conversation. And my comment will be very simple. We all need to be part of a change of the narrative. Over the years, we have all worked with a single line narrative, which has hindered us from becoming who we ought to become in life. The past is past, but we can control and create the future we want for ourselves and for our children. And that begins with a new narrative. We must believe in ourselves. We must believe that we can make a difference. We must believe in doing things right at the right time, with the right people in the right ways, and for the right results. And gradually, we'll change the narrative. We can't change the narrative by standing by the sideline, but we can change it by being in the forefront, not fighting, not quarreling, but being intellectually sound enough to make our arguments and to discuss our desires in the right quarters at the right time. It has been a lovely conversation, and thank you for enlightening me again today. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Oh, you too. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. O.
Olive Community Services is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Southern California that provides culturally appropriate services to seniors, their family, and the community. Through its physical and virtual interactive programs, Olive engages participants in a variety of ways that promotes health and well-being. To learn more about Olive Community Services, to get involved, or to make a donation, please visit www.olivecs.org or email info@olivecs.org. Be a change maker, and together, let's live, learn, and thrive.